Let's talk about the Sony ZV-E1, which is the camera that I'm currently shooting on right now. It is definitely one of the most interesting cameras that Sony makes, and it's also very compelling for content creators. Now, the whole ZV-E line of Sony cameras is very interesting because it's geared more towards like ease of use, content creators, vloggers. However, the ZV-E1 differentiates itself from the rest of the line because it is a full frame, full-fledged video featured camera that just happens to be in that smaller compact body. After having this camera for a little while now, I want to talk about some of the features that I really love about it and some of the things that help it to stand apart from some of the other cameras in Sony's line. Also want to talk about some of the things that I don't really love too much about it, and also who this camera is for and the use case. And if you haven't heard it yet, I think the sea lions are mating or something, so that noise is just going to be happening. Sorry. When I first got this camera, the thing that stood out to me the most was its size. This camera is so small and tiny, especially for me as a user coming from a full frame A7 IV. This camera is really, really tiny and compact, which is great for bringing it with you wherever you want to go. You could literally just take the camera body without a lens or without a microphone, and you could like put it in your pocket. You could put it in your hoodie and just stow it away on your person and bring it with you wherever you want to go, which is cool and convenient for just ease of use and bringing it around to shoot. Because honestly, even though I have a really nice Sony A7 IV, it's a full frame camera like this camera, but it's much bigger in the form factor. It's just a little bit more clunky, and it's not as easy to just kind of bring with me. I can still toss it in a bag, but it's just heavier. It's a little more bulky, and I just don't want to always deal with all the fuss of that. And so I like having a nice, small, compact camera that still can do a lot, and it's very capable with video, and I can bring it with me without any problem. Now, when it comes to video features, the Sony ZV-E1 is incredible. It's basically a mini A7S Mark III because this camera has the exact same 12 megapixel sensor as the A7S III, which gives it all the same video quality and features as that camera, but at less of a price and a smaller form factor. That means you can shoot 10-bit 4K video in 24 frames per second, 60 frames per second, and when you do the licensing upgrade on this camera, you can get 120 frames per second as well. And that's something that my Sony A7 IV doesn't even do. One other feature that I love about this camera is that it has some really cool integrated AI technologies like auto framing, which is what I'm currently using right now. So essentially, you can have the camera just follow you around in your frame, just like you had somebody shooting with you, or if you were going to like keyframe things in post-production to get the camera to follow you. It's a really cool feature because all you do is activate it and you see this little box that basically just follows you around in the frame, and it does all this stuff in real time, so that way you don't have to worry about doing anything in post. Now, another thing that I love about the ZV-E1 is its dynamic active stabilization. This gives you some of the best stabilization that I've seen in a camera. It's almost gimbal-like because it does absolute magic to keep your camera stable and really does kind of remove the need of a gimbal, which makes this an even more compact system. Now you may be wondering, since this camera has the same camera sensor as the A7S Mark III, is it good in low light? The answer is yes, because it's the same sensor as the A7S Mark III. Right now, I'm walking around at night just from the light of the streets, and it's doing a really good job of keeping things nice and clean. I'm using the Sony 20mm f1.8 lens, and I am shooting at ISO 12,800, which is the second native ISO of this camera, so it's going to give you the cleanest image. The other one is 640, cleanest, and then all the way up at 12,800 in S-Log3, cleanest image. Now, there is no perfect camera, at least not yet. So let's talk about some of the things that are not so great about this camera. The first and most notable downside of this camera is the lack of a viewfinder. Most cameras have a nice little viewfinder that you can put your eye up to, and you can see your settings and how everything is looking as far as focus and exposure. But on this camera, you are limited to just the flip out LCD screen. Now, it is a good LCD screen. It's got great touch capability and functionality for changing all of your settings, but I'm coming from a camera that has a nice viewfinder, and I have found myself at times taking pictures and kind of putting the camera up to my face just instinctively, waiting for the viewfinder to be there, and of course it's not. Now, one thing I would recommend is to set the screen brightness to its brightest setting, which is the sunny weather setting. This ensures that you are getting the brightest output from the screen, so if you find yourself in sunny or bright conditions, you're going to have a better chance of seeing your screen, your settings, your composition, and your focus. This will definitely work for most situations, but there are definitely some other times where I've been either outside or in some brighter environments, and it was still tough to see the screen. Another downside to this camera is its lack of custom buttons. As I mentioned earlier, I'm accustomed to the Sony A7 IV, which has loads of custom buttons and different ways that you can set your menus and custom memory modes that are very easily accessible. The ZV-E1 doesn't really have that capability, or at least not easily accessible. You only get 2 custom buttons, and then of course you can assign your other buttons to do different functions, but otherwise you're diving into the function menu, or you're having to change all of your settings directly on the screen. Now, I have found a good way to configure this camera to where it makes sense for me to easily switch frame rates and my settings from photo to video. If you want me to make a video about that, leave a comment down below. But all that to say, if you're coming from one of the other Sony cameras or another camera that has a lot of customization options, you might feel like you're lacking with the ZV-E1. There are a few more notable things about the ZV-E1 body. First of which being is that it just kind of feels not as premium as like my full frame A7 IV. I think it has to do with this grip. It's not quite rubbery. It's a little bit like plasticky rubbery. I don't know. It doesn't feel like bad, but it definitely doesn't feel as premium as my A7 IV. Because this camera is so tiny, it only has one SD card slot, which for some people is a big deal. For myself, it's not really a big deal. I don't always shoot with 2 cards for the redundancy, but I know for some people it is very important to them. You do, however, get a headphone jack for monitoring your audio through the camera, which is a nice feature to have. You also have your regular mic input, and you also have your USB-C port, which is good for power delivery or for using this camera as a webcam. Now, as I mentioned before, the ZV-E1 has a 12 megapixel sensor. It's the same sensor as the A7S Mark III, which makes it fantastic for video, but for some people, it may not be quite good enough for photos. Now, it's not to say it's not a capable photo camera. This camera has all of the latest, greatest autofocusing technology that Sony has come out with. It takes high quality raw images, and it even has a really fast shutter option. Now, 12 megapixels is plenty good, I think, for capturing memories, for social media, for really a lot of different things. But if you're going to be doing a lot of cropping in post, then you will definitely notice a quality drop off pretty quickly. The only other potential con of this camera is actually something that I have not yet experienced, but I know that plenty of people who have had this camera have experienced, and that is overheating. Now, this does make some sense to me because this is a small camera body. It doesn't have a fan or any sort of ventilation on it, so it does make sense to me that something like this that can do things like 4K, 24, 60, and 120 frames per second could potentially overheat. Now, I have seen some pretty cool solutions to mitigate the risk of overheating with this camera, one of which is like a little fan that you can actually attach to the back of the camera when the screen is flipped out, and that helps to dissipate the heat from the body, and apparently it works wonders. So I might have to check that out. Let me know if you'd want to see a video about something like that. The ZV-E1 normally sells for $2,200. Right now it happens to be on sale for $1,900, and I actually got mine for cheaper because I bought it used for around $1,600. And for that price, you get a lot of features packed into this tiny little camera. This camera is an absolute beast when it comes to video because you get that nice 10-bit 4K video in 24, 60, and 120 frames per second. You also get really cool features that are geared towards video creators that many other cameras don't have. Things like auto framing help you to create videos on your own. There's also other things that I haven't even mentioned in this video, like cinematic vlog mode, and you can even load in your very own custom LUTs to this camera. With that in mind, this camera is a great option for anybody who is a content creator because it's got you more than covered on the video side of things. things. It's plenty capable for doing photography, for social media. And if you happen to get into live stream, or if you're just needing to do a lot of video calls on a more professional level, this camera's got you covered. So those are my thoughts on the Sony ZV-E1. I'm curious to know what your thoughts are about this camera in the comments down below. Do you like this camera? What don't you like about this camera? What are some issues it might be having, or maybe some questions that I can answer for you in a future video? Let me know in the comments down below. And while you're down there, if you got value out of this video, why don't you go ahead and add some value right back to it by hitting that like button. You can also check out the links to the camera gear that I have and the different tools that I use to make these videos. I personally am very stoked about this camera, and you will be seeing a lot more of it on the channel, so make sure to stay tuned for that. But until the next time, my name is Zach Sopak, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.